It was never supposed to come out the way it did. Secrets inside the royal world don't slip. They are handled, controlled, and buried under layers of rules and careful silence. The palace has always been very good at that. For generations, it has taken in scandals, swallowed hard truths, and shown the world a calm, polished version of itself. Portraits on walls, smiles at garden parties, statements that say everything and nothing at the same time. But every powerful place, no matter how strong, eventually hits the moment it cannot control. For the House of Windsor, that moment arrived on an otherwise normal Tuesday in early spring, inside a room that had kept more than a century of carefully guarded secrets. Catherine had not been expecting it. That much was clear to anyone who had seen her face in the seconds after it happened. The shortest pause, the barely noticeable stillness that crossed her expression before she pulled herself together. She was good at keeping herself together. Years inside the royal family had made her an expert at showing nothing. But this was different. This wasn't a hard question from a journalist or an awkward moment at a public event. This was the thing she had suspected for a long time, the thing she had turned over quietly in her mind during long evenings at Windsor, the thing she had never said out loud because saying it out loud would have made it completely real. And now it was real, not because she had found it out herself, but because someone in that room, someone who had assumed she wasn't listening, had said it clearly and without hesitation, as though it was common knowledge among the people who mattered. She had arrived at Buckingham Palace that morning for a routine meeting, one of the regular sessions between senior palace staff and the Wales team, the kind that filled up calendars and rarely produced anything important. William had sent his private secretary in his place. Catherine had come herself, as she often did when she felt the details mattered. She had a particular feeling for those moments, the ones that looked like paperwork but were actually something else. She couldn't have told you what had brought her in that morning. Call it instinct. Call it the weight of small things, small observations, small things that didn't add up, that had quietly built up over the previous several months without becoming anything she could name. The meeting had been running for nearly 40 minutes. There were 7 people in the room, 2 of her own helpers, 3 senior palace officials, and 2 members of a communications team she knew by face but not by name. The conversation had moved through the usual list: scheduling, letters, an upcoming visit to the north of England. People spoke in careful tones, kept their eyes on their papers, professional, ordered, exactly as these things were supposed to be. And then one of the communications staff, a man in his mid-40s, the kind who carried himself like someone always in the room where decisions were made, leaned slightly toward the colleague beside him and said something he had not meant to say out loud. He had meant it as a whisper. It landed as a full sentence, clear enough for Catherine, sitting 2 chairs away, her pen still moving across the page, to hear every word without appearing to listen. She did not react. She kept reading. Her pen kept moving, but something inside her had stopped completely. The words had not shocked her the way you expect to be shocked. They had instead confirmed something, quietly and without any drama, that she had been carrying alone for far too long. What he had said was not a confession. It wasn't a big dramatic reveal, and it was never meant to be one. It was something far more telling than that. A casual remark made between 2 people who thought of themselves as insiders, a passing mention of an arrangement, a quick acknowledgement of a decision and how it had been reached. But what those words meant was everything. It did not point to one person acting on their own. It pointed inward. It pointed upward. And it named, without naming, a choice that had been made on purpose by a group of people at a direct cost to Catherine without her ever being told. She stayed in the room until the meeting ended. She thanked the people around the table, picked up her folder and walked down the hallway with her helper. She said nothing until they reached the car. Then she quietly asked for 30 minutes before the afternoon started again. Her helper, who had worked with her long enough to understand that kind of silence, nodded and said nothing more. In the back of the car, Catherine looked out at the city moving past the window and did not see any of it. She was not angry yet. Anger, she knew, was something to be saved, something to be used when the right moment came. What she felt instead was a sharp, cold kind of clarity, the kind that arrives when you have been telling yourself a story about a situation for a long time, and the facts have finally had enough. She had given people the benefit of the doubt. She had trusted people when trust seemed like the only reasonable option. She had often looked past things that hadn't quite felt right, not out of weakness, not out of being foolish, but because the alternative was to spend every waking hour of her life inside this institution in a state of open suspicion. She had chosen not to live that way. She had chosen to believe in the good intentions of the people around her. She had been wrong, not about everything, but about this, about who was watching, about who had been making decisions that affected her life, about who had known the truth all this time while she had trusted them. By the time the car reached Adelaide Cottage, Catherine had made two decisions. The first was that she would not tell William right away, not because she was hiding it from him. She had never worked that way, not in the years of their marriage that had truly tested them, not in the moments that had asked more of her than she had thought she had left to give. She would tell him, but she needed to understand it fully herself before she handed it to someone else, even him. The second decision was simpler. She would go back to the beginning. She had learned this about herself over the years, that when something confused or upset her, the urge to move quickly was almost always wrong. Running toward a conclusion without walking the full path that led to it meant arriving with only part of the truth, and she was not interested in parts. She had lived inside enough of those already, so she sat in the small sitting room off the main hallway, the one that caught the afternoon light in a way she had always found calming, and she began to think. Not about what she had heard that morning, she already knew those words perfectly, could replay them without effort, but about the months before them. She was looking for the thread, the one she had felt but never fully followed. It had started, she now believed, sometime the previous autumn. There had been a decision made about a joint event, one she had been told was changed for practical reasons, a different location, a shorter schedule. She had accepted that explanation. It had seemed reasonable, but thinking about it now, something about it felt off. There had been a meeting before it, a meeting she had not been included in. She had noticed at the time and let it go. She let a great many things go. It was, in many ways, how you survived inside a place that produced an endless supply of small problems and unexplained decisions. Then there had been the matter of the briefing documents. She had received them late, twice, within 6 weeks. Both times she had been given an explanation. Both times the explanation had been smooth and complete. And both times she had accepted it because she had no reason not to, and because questioning every little thing was the surest way to wear yourself out. But the pattern was there. She could see it clearly now, from this side of what she knew. It wasn't sloppiness. Sloppiness was random. This had a pattern to it. She stood and walked to the window. The garden was beginning to show the first signs of spring, pale light on the grass, the trees not yet fully covered in leaves. She had always loved this time of year for that exact quality, the world in the act of becoming itself. She used to find it hopeful. Today it felt empty. The thing that bothered her most was not the decision itself. She had lived inside this institution long enough to understand that decisions were made above her, beside her, and sometimes instead of her. That was not the part that had taken her breath away in that meeting room. What had taken her breath away was the easy, casual way the remark was made. The total lack of concern in the voice of the man who made it. The way he had said it, the way you say something that everyone in your circle already knows, something so settled it barely counts as information. That was what showed her the full shape of the thing. It had not been a recent decision. It had not been made in response to a crisis and quietly regretted. It had been known and kept and talked about in rooms she was not in, for what she now suspected was a very long time. She thought about Charlotte, automatically without quite meaning to. Her daughter had nothing to do with this directly, and yet Catherine's mind went there the way it always did when she felt something threatening, toward her children first, toward the question of what they would one day need to understand about the world they had been born into. Charlotte was old enough to notice things she was not old enough to put into words. She noticed tension in rooms. She noticed when adults were choosing their words carefully. She would not notice this yet, but she would. Children always did, eventually. Catherine moved away from the window and sat back down. She needed to be careful about this. She needed to separate what she knew from what she suspected, what had been confirmed from what she was guessing. It would be easy, dangerously easy, to let what she had heard recolor everything that came before it, to turn 2 years of small moments into one big plan. She was not going to do that. She was going to be careful. She was going to be fair, even now, even to people who had perhaps not done the same for her. But being fair did not mean doing nothing, and it did not mean staying quiet. She picked up her phone and put it back down again. Then she picked it up once more and typed a short message to her most trusted helper, the one who had been with her the longest, who knew the difference between a request and an instruction. The message was 6 words. It asked for a specific file, one that had to do with letters from the previous autumn, meeting notes, the kind that were kept as a record but rarely looked at again. Within 11 minutes, the reply came back. The file existed, it was available, and it had been looked at recently by someone outside Catherine's team, 3 weeks before the meeting that had supposedly been changed for practical reasons. She read the message twice, then she set the phone face down on the cushion beside her. Outside, the garden held its pale and quiet light. Inside, something had changed for good. William came home just after 6. She heard the front door, heard him say a few words to the security team outside, heard his footsteps cross the hallway in that familiar rhythm she could pick out in complete darkness. He paused at the kitchen, then came to the sitting room doorway and found her exactly where she had been for the better part of 2 hours, still, sitting straight, her hands in her lap, the phone face down beside her. He understood immediately, the way he always could when she wasn't pretending to be composed but simply was. He sat down across from her without being asked. He did not say anything straight away. That was one of the things about him that she had always valued, his ability to be present before being helpful. Most people rushed to fill silence with words. William understood that sometimes silence was the most honest thing in the room. She told him everything. She told it in order, from the moment she had arrived at the morning meeting to the file access her helper had confirmed. She kept her voice steady throughout. She did not reach for emotional words because she didn't need them. The facts, laid out plainly and in order, were doing everything that emotion would have done, and more. She watched his face as she spoke. She watched the moment it changed. Not dramatically. William's face rarely moved dramatically. But there was a shift behind his eyes, a particular kind of stillness that arrived when he was working hard to stay calm over something that had truly unsettled him. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Who else knows you know?" It was exactly the right question. Not because he was thinking about strategy before he was thinking about her. She knew him well enough to understand that his mind moved that way, not out of coldness, but out of a natural instinct to find the edges of a situation before he stepped into it. He had grown up in this institution. He knew better than almost anyone that information once known to be held by a particular person became a kind of power, and the moment others knew she had it, everything would shift. "Nobody," she said. "Not yet." He nodded slowly. Then he stood and crossed the room and sat beside her. He didn't reach for her hand or offer a prepared reassurance. He simply closed the distance, and she felt it, the particular weight of someone choosing to be beside you rather than across from you. They talked for a long time after that. Not about what to do, not yet, but about what it meant, about how long it might have been going on, about who would have needed to know, who would have had to agree, who could have said no and hadn't. There were not many names that fit all of those things at once. When they arrived at the short list by working through the options, neither of them said it out loud. They didn't need to. The names sat in the room between them like something that had always been there, that they had always been careful not to look at directly, and that now they were both looking at without turning away. It was William who finally said it, quietly, without anger in his voice, but without protection either. Just the name, plainly, as a statement of where the thinking had led them. Catherine held his gaze and said nothing, because nothing was what was needed. Agreement in that moment did not need words. The next morning she was up before 6. She dressed without waking William, went downstairs, and stood in the kitchen in the early grey light with a cup of tea she barely touched. She was thinking about the conversation, not if, but how. That question had settled itself cleanly sometime in the night while she had lain awake listening to the house around her. There was no version of this she could live with that did not involve speaking directly to the person at the center of it. She was not built for the other option. She had seen what the other option looked like, the half conversations, the careful silences, the decisions made by people who were too cautious to ever say the plainest thing in the room. She had spent years dealing with the damage that approach left behind. She was not going to add to it. What she needed was the right moment, not a planned one, a real one. The kind that came from normal circumstances and needed only the courage to use it honestly. She did not have to wait long. 2 days later, there was a small family gathering at Windsor, the kind that appeared on the calendar as casual, though nothing inside that place was ever entirely casual. Drinks before dinner, a relaxed arrangement of the kind Charles liked when he wanted the feeling of a normal family without the full formal setting. Catherine arrived with William and the children. George and Louis moved immediately toward their grandfather, who greeted them with the natural warmth he kept for moments that didn't require him to be king. Charlotte stayed close to Catherine's side, her hand finding her mother's in that quiet way she had when a room felt too big for her. Camilla was already there, sitting by the window with a glass of wine and a woman Catherine knew from the charity world. They exchanged a polite greeting, the kind made entirely from surface-level warmth, friendly in all its parts and revealing in none of them. Catherine smiled, Camilla smiled. The evening moved forward. It was only after dinner, when the children had gone upstairs and Charles had stepped away with William and 2 senior helpers to talk about summer plans, that Catherine and Camilla found themselves, almost without appearing to plan it, alone together in the drawing room. The fire was low, the room was quiet, there was no audience and no written agenda. Catherine set her glass on the side table, folded her hands in her lap, and looked directly across the room at the woman who had known, who had, she now believed, always known, and said, in a voice that was entirely calm and entirely final, "I think it's time we spoke honestly with each other. Don't you?" Camilla looked up, and in the split second before her expression reset itself into its usual practiced calm, Catherine saw it, the recognition. The awareness that the moment she had perhaps always known would eventually come, had come, right now, in this quiet room with the fire burning low and no one else present to make it easier to manage. There was no escaping it, and they both knew it. Camilla did not look away. That much could be said for her. She held Catherine's gaze across the quiet room with the steadiness of someone who had come through hard conversations before and understood that the first person to look away gives up something they cannot get back. But Catherine was not playing that game. She was not here to win a stare. She was here to say the thing that needed to be said, clearly and without any drama, and then to be done with carrying it. She spoke without raising her voice. She laid out what she knew, not everything, not the full picture of it, but enough. The meeting, the remarks she had heard, the file that had been looked at, the pattern of decisions made in rooms she had never been invited into, decisions that had touched her life and her children's lives, decisions made by people who had smiled at her across dinner tables while knowing what she did not. She spoke in complete sentences, without stopping, without the gentle language she had spent years using in order to make hard things easier for everyone else to deal with. She was done making it easier. Camilla listened. She did not cut in. When Catherine finished, a silence opened between them, not the comfortable kind, not the kind that means understanding, but the tight kind that exists at the edge of something that cannot be taken back. Then Camilla set her wine glass down very carefully on the table beside her, as though the act of placing it needed her full attention, and said, "You don't have the full picture." Catherine had expected this. She had expected several versions of this moment, had gone over them during the sleepless hours of the previous 2 nights, had prepared herself for being brushed off, for a partial admission wrapped in excuses, for the particular kind of careful talking that looks like honesty while giving away nothing it doesn't intend to. What she had not expected was what came next, because Camilla paused, a long pause, the kind that comes not from planning but from something older and less controlled, and then she said something that Catherine had not prepared for, not a full admission, not a confession, but a crack, a sentence that accepted, in its careful and limited way, that there had been a conversation, that certain things had been looked at above the level Catherine had been told about, that the decision, when it was made, had not been made lightly, and that she had disagreed with it. Catherine took this in. She gave it time, turned it carefully, looked at it from the angle that served the truth rather than the angle that served her anger. She believed it, not completely, not without some doubt, but enough to understand that the shape of what had happened was more complicated than one person in one room making one choice. These places were rarely that simple. Blame in a place like this was spread in ways that made it almost impossible to hold in one pair of hands, but complicated did not mean acceptable, and disagreeing with a decision while saying nothing about it was its own kind of choice. She told Camilla that, gently but without softening it past the point of truth. She said that she understood the position was not simple. She said that she believed her when she said she had not been the one behind it. And then she said, with the same quiet certainty that had defined every important moment of her life inside this institution, "But you knew, and I did not." And that is the part one will not move past without honesty between us. Whatever comes next, whatever is asked of us in public, whatever we are expected to show the world, it will be built on that honesty, or it will not be built at all. Camilla looked at her for a long moment, then she gave a small nod, not a performance of agreement, not a polite gesture.